The RAD ONE V2 versus the Reebok Nano X5. Four major differences to note between these shoes include number one, the midsole compositions and how that's going to feel for your training. So in the Reebok Nano X5, you have this dual response midsole. It gives you a slightly more versatile and soft feeling up here in the forefoot, and then a slightly denser feel back here in the heel. Now, one thing I like about this midsole is that compared to the Nano X3 and Nano X4 that had the float ride energy foam, is a little bit more dense, this midsole is softer. It feels a little more forgiving for runs, classes hit, and more versatile training. So if you like a slightly softer ride or something that's going to be a little bit more plush and pliable, especially through the forefoot, that is where I think this midsole is going to make a lot of sense for your needs. Compared to the RAD ONE V2, you have the swell foam midsole in this model. Now, compared to the V1, I actually think that the midsole in this shoe feels a little bit softer, so it is a bit more forgiving for different movements. Now, this is going to run consistent throughout, and then you have this TPU back here in the heel of the RAD ONE V2. Overall, this model has a similar level of versatility with the midsole feel compared to the Reebok Nano X5. Now, it does have a slightly wider, more built-out platform, and so that said, when it comes to the actual use cases of both these shoes, they're both very versatile, but I almost describe the Nano X5 as being a really good option for somebody who goes to the gym, does a little bit of everything, and they're not so focused on CrossFit versus the V2, which is going to give you a versatile feel, but be a little bit more dialed for that. So if you're much more generalist, the midsole and how it feels in the Nano X5 should work really great for your needs. And then if you're more of a person who is focused on lifting and CrossFit specifically, the V2's midsole will feel pretty good for your needs. The second major difference to note between these shoes is their upper constructions. So in the X5, you have the flex weave that runs throughout the forefoot and midfoot in this shoe. You have this low TPU layer here. This used to be the lift and run chassis system, but I don't actually believe it intersects into the heel back here anymore. It just shoots up here into the forefoot on the lateral medial side. This keeps the shoe a little bit more lightweight, and the flex weave breathes pretty well in my opinion. You have a padded mesh tongue here that has a gusset, and it runs a little bit shorter, but it doesn't really have, I think, any issues with security overall. The upper in the RAD ONE V2 feels a lot more built out. It's a little bit heavier, and it doesn't breathe as well. So I think a big difference to note between the uppers of these shoes is that the Nano X5 breathes a bit better than the RAD ONE V2. This is definitely a hotter model. Feels a little bit more bulky, feels a little bit heavier on the feet. The third major difference to note between these shoes is their outsole constructions. So in the Nano X5, you have a reworked outsole compared to the X3 and X4. You have the split construction up here. You do have some exposed foam here, so do keep in mind that if you want to wear this shoe for daily wear, you may want to be careful wearing this model out in water or mud, because if that gets up in here, that can cause the foam to deteriorate faster. That is stereotypical with any training shoe with brakes there. And then you also have that Rope Pro Tech on the medial and lateral side for additional rope climb support. Now, I have yet to have any issues with breakdown of this model with rope climbing, so it does a really good job, I think, with gripping, and the outsole moves pretty dang well, which I also like, and it doesn't come up so high on the heel to where it gets in the way of anything. In the RAD ONE V2, you have the wave outsole construction. So looking at the outsole first with its grip, you have a full rubber tread. You don't have any exposed foam, which I personally like. I've worn this shoe in wetter climates and I haven't had any breakdown or anything yet with the outsole on the bottom of the shoe. And then you also have the wave wraps here on the lateral and medial side. Now, this is designed to give the shoe a bit more of an edge with appearance, but also support its stability and grip with rope climbs and whatnot. You also have an extended outsole layer here on the toe, just like you do in the Nano X5. And now I think the big outsole difference between the RAD ONE V2 and the Nano X5 is that in the RAD ONE V2, the outsole is just heavier. It feels a little bit more bulky. You also have the wave construction, which I think is going to be polarizing with its overall appearance. I personally think it looks really much like a basketball shoe versus a traditional training shoe, which I know some folks love, but for me personally, I like the colorways that are a little bit more toned down. You can't see the wave pop as much, but from a grip standpoint, both outsoles do a really good job in the gym, but the RAD ONE V2 does have a slightly more bulkier feel to it with its wave construction, and I think it's a little bit more edgy with its appearance too, which again could resonate, could not resonate depending on what you're after. The fourth difference to note between these shoes is their overall fits. So in the RAD ONE V2, you actually have a slightly wider platform, but wearing both of these shoes, I don't think necessarily one feels outright like much more wide feeling compared to the other, because with the Nano X5, I think with the upper construction, it's a little bit more light. So I think when you put your foot into the Nano X5, it doesn't necessarily feel overly constricted like it could in the Nano X4. And compared to the RAD ONE V2, because the upper, I think in this shoe runs a little bit thicker, and you do have a slightly thicker insole. Pro tip, swap out that insole for a thinner insole and it gives you a more spacious fit with the shoe. But you have a slightly more lower profile upper. So even though the RAD ONE V2 technically has a slightly wider platform, both of these shoes, I think, feel similar with their widths, and if you have a D, E, double E width foot, you should feel fine in both of these shoes. Also, something I've noted too is that the RAD ONE V2 actually does have a bit more of an arch feeling, which I know is ironic compared to the Nano X5 because Nanos over the last few years have traditionally had a lot of arch. There is still some arch in the Nano X5, but I think with the wave construction here on the medial side, you will feel this a little bit more. So if you have an exceptionally flat foot, my tip to you would be, one, tread lightly if you're going to invest in the RAD ONE V2 and you hate feeling any form of arch at all. Or again, swap out that insole for something flatter or thinner. That should give you a little bit more wiggle room there. But now let's talk about the performance differences between these shoes. All right, now which model is better for lifting? Honestly, this one's tough because both of these shoes I think do a really good job in the gym for lifting. If you're somebody that just needs a shoe for tackling some heavier free weights, some machine work, some strength and hypertrophy work sessions. Now, which model I think has a better platform for lifting? I would give the edge to the RAD ONE V2. I think if there's one area where this model has taken a step up from the V1, it is for lifting. It's a little bit wider, the heel feels very planted, and with the softer midsole, it's actually a little bit easier I think to ground the toe in this model when trying to deadlift or do heavy cleans and you really want to have full ground contact with the forefoot. Now the Nano X5 works really great. It's a bit more generalist, and so if you are somebody again who's not doing CrossFit workouts and you have access to Reebok more readily, or you can find these on sale, this model works great as well. The dual response midsole has done a really good job for all of my lifting needs. So when it comes to lifting, both models perform great. Don't overthink that, but the RAD ONE V2 is going to take a slight edge for its platform if we're trying to nitpick between these shoes. Now, which model is better for CrossFit? Honestly, both of these shoes have been really solid as well. I have yet to have any complaints with either of these models. Neither have really broken down for that context. The RAD ONE V2 is a little bit more optimized, I think, for CrossFit, but the Nano X5 has also performed really well. And so if you've traditionally got along with Reebok Nano shoes, or if you liked how the Nano X2 fit and you skipped on the X3 and X4, the X5 could be a great option to go with because I do feel like it fits somewhat similar to the Nano X2. The RAD ONE V2 also does a really good job. It has a slightly more well-rounded feel compared to the RAD ONE V1. And so if I had to give the edge to one of these shoes for CrossFit, I would maybe go with the V2. But if your box is notoriously hot and you're constantly running warm with your feet, you might actually want to go with the Nano X5 because it does breathe better. Now, which model is better for cross training? That's where I'm going to give the edge to the Nano X5. This model I think has performed exceptionally well, and I have not liked the last couple of Nanos when it comes to making them my full-time training shoe for cross training only, and so that is saying something. I love the RAD ONE V1, and the RAD ONE V2 has done a really good job with cross training as well, but I think with the hotter platform and just the bulkiness of this shoe, it's not necessarily my favorite shoe for cross-training only workouts. So if I am doing a lot of broad jumps and stuff like that, I want a shoe that's a little bit more pliable. I like doing lateral work more, for example, too, in the Reebok Nano X5 compared to the V2. Not that you can't do it in the shoe, it's just a little bit heavier and bulkier compared to the Nano X5. So for cross-training HIIT and classes and stuff like that, I would say probably go Nano X5 over the RAD ONE V2, unless you're dying to get one of these colorways and you do a lot of lifting and CrossFit too. I think you'll be plenty fine in the Nano X5. Now, which model is better for short runs? Now, when we're talking short runs in this context, I'm talking anywhere from 400 meters to about a mile in length. I don't necessarily love using either of these models for running longer than a mile at a time if I can avoid it. And so for the short interval runs, both models I think will work pretty well. I do think the Nano X5 actually has a slightly more accommodating ride, but the V2 I think, like the V1, does a really good job with short runs as well. The softer midsole I think also helps give this shoe a better feel in the forefoot for those short intervals where you're really heavy on the forefoot and you're running a little bit quicker. So all that to say, both models can work for that ask, but I say the Nano X5 is a little bit more comfortable. So if again, you're going to the gym on a weekly basis and you're doing a little bit of everything and you like to do more pre or post workout runs, the Nano X5 I think can be a little bit more accommodating for that. But the V2 I think also does a really good job. Once again, it hasn't lost its edge for running by any means. Now, which model is better for daily wear? So I think that's really going to come down to personal preference here. Both of these shoes feel good when it comes to comfort for daily wear needs. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, the RAD ONE V2 runs warmer once again, and two, it does have a bit more of an arch feeling to it. So that could be something to consider for folks who have exceptionally flat feet and they hate arches or live in hotter climates. And now the Nano X5, when it comes to daily wear, one thing I'd say be careful of is this midsole here being so close to the ground. If you're in damp climates or if you're walking around in rain, puddles, etc., be conscious of the midsole of this shoe. The V2 does have a bit more protection, I think, from an all-day wear compared to the Nano X5. But to give you my concise pick here, if I had to choose one for daily wear, I would actually probably go Nano X5, and that's only because I don't necessarily resonate with the wave construction on the RAD ONE V2. Also, I just like the breathability of the Nano X5 a little bit better for that ask as well. All right, to give you guys some sizing suggestions on both of these shoes. So these are both size 10s. I wear a size 10 in every single shoe review. I have a normal arch, normal instep, and an E to double E width foot. True to size fits me well in both of these models, and I think if you have a narrow, medium to E to double E width foot, you should be safe going true to size in both of these models. Now, if you have, for example, a 3 or 4 E width foot and you have a super blocky foot, or if you have a flatter foot and you don't like any arch, these models might not be your best bets. They both do have a bit of a taper, they have a bit of an arch. The V2, I think you can feel the arch a little bit more in as well. Now, with the V2, if you take out that insole and swap in a thinner insole, it can help a bit with fit, but for the most part, I think true to size will be the right call in both of these shoes. And if you keep in mind the toe boxes and the arches in these models, it gets a little bit easier to decide, okay, which model would be best, which size to go with. Now, if you do have a 2E or 3E width foot and you want to hedge your bets regarding width, you may want to go up a half size in both of these shoes, but I think for the vast majority of athletes, true to size will be a safe call in these models. All right, now let's look at the weight, heel, toe drop, and insole differences between these two shoes. So the RAD ONE V2 for my size 10 has a weight of 13.45 ounces. In the Nano X5 in my size 10, we have a weight of 13.30 ounces, so pretty similar weights. The heel to toe drop in the Nano X5 sits at 7 millimeters, whereas the drop in the RAD ONE V2 sits at 6 millimeters, so very similar there as well. And then both shoes have thin foam removable insoles that you can take out. The Nano X5's insole does have a bit of arch, so you can also swap that for a different insole if you feel the arch a lot in that shoe. Similar with the RAD ONE V2's insole as well. All right, y'all, that wraps up my breakdown of the Nano X5 versus the RAD ONE V2. Both shoes, I think, have been pretty stellar in the gym, and they both deliver for a wide range of activities. If you have additional questions on either of these models and which you should go with, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, y'all, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys in the next one.